I spent 2 years nursing Ava back to health, dedicating every waking moment to her recovery, only for her to dismiss my devotion as a brotherly bond once she could walk again. She tossed my love aside to fall into the arms of someone new, leaving me with no choice but to take my payout and walk away. It took losing her to realize that you can never hold on to someone whose heart was never yours to begin with. After the accident left Ava paralyzed, I spent 2 years as her primary caregiver, handling everything from her physical therapy to her daily needs. Everyone in our circle assumed that the moment she got back on her feet, the first thing she would do was walk down the aisle to marry me. However, on the night her final surgery was declared a success, I sat by her bed and asked if she still wanted to be my wife. She froze, and though she didn't say a word, I couldn't miss the flicker of pure resentment and condescension that crossed her face. I simply gave her a small smile and told her I understood everything I needed to know. I didn't linger in that hospital room for another second, leaving that night with nothing but a bank card worth $10 million and never looking back. When I brought up the marriage, Ava seemed caught off guard, staring silently at her legs for what felt like an eternity. The hospital door was slightly cracked, allowing the muffled celebration of the nurses and visitors in the hallway to drift into the heavy silence of the room. I could hear people talking outside about how the surgery was a miracle and that she would be walking within weeks. They whispered about how she had almost lost her will to live 2 years ago and how I was the only reason she pulled through. Everyone was convinced that a wedding was the natural next step for us. Ava listened to the steady stream of praise and well wishes from the hallway, yet she remained perfectly still and silent. The tension in the room thickened until the air felt heavy with an unbearable awkwardness. Eventually, I stood up and leaned over her bed, just as I had done every day for 2 years. I began to gently massage her calf muscles to keep the circulation going. "Is the pressure okay?" I asked softly, trying to shatter the wall of silence between us. Her rigid posture finally softened under my touch, and I asked if she felt any discomfort. She gave a small, weary shake of her head and murmured that it actually felt quite nice. I looked down at my calloused hands, lost in thought. When this all started, I didn't know the first thing about physical therapy. But Ava had been raised as a pampered Thompson heiress and couldn't stand the idea of a stranger touching her, screaming at every nurse or aide until they quit. Since her recovery depended entirely on daily massage, I had to take matters into my own hands. I spent 3 months training with a top-tier physical therapist in San Francisco, obsessively learning the exact pressure points and techniques needed to save her nerves. I spent weeks soaking my hands in oils to make them soft enough for her skin and practiced on my own legs until I was bruised, just to get the rhythm right. The very first time I actually tried it on her, I waited until she had drifted off to sleep, too scared of her rejection to do it while she was awake. She was a light sleeper, and the moment she felt my touch, she bolted upright and started screaming for me to get my filthy hands off her and get out of the house. I didn't move an inch. I just kept my eyes down and continued the massage exactly as I'd been taught. Since she couldn't use her legs, she grabbed her pillows and hurled them at my head. When I refused to leave, she became hysterical, throwing lamps, books, and anything within reach at me. The final blow came from a heavy silver picture frame, a photo of her during her glory days at Stanford. In the photo, she was holding a tennis trophy with a radiant, triumphant smile on her face. As warm blood began to trickle down my forehead from where the frame hit me, she stopped screaming and stared at me in horror, her hand instinctively reaching out to help. The reality of her paralysis hit her again as she struggled to sit up, and she collapsed back onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Through her gasping breaths, she begged me to leave her alone and stop wasting my life on someone who was broken beyond repair. She kept crying that it was all for nothing because she couldn't feel a single thing in her lower body. She was drowning in a sea of hopelessness back then, but I refused to let her sink. I showed up at the Thompson estate every single morning, regardless of the weather, forcing her to stay consistent with her physical therapy until we finally saw a glimmer of light. Things hit rock bottom when Mrs. Thompson found Ava unconscious after she tried to overdose on sleeping pills. While her mother was hysterical in the ER, I knelt down in front of Ava's wheelchair and firmly told her to look me in the eyes. To my surprise, she actually listened. I told her with absolute conviction that things were going to get better and that she needed to trust me. I don't even know where that confidence came from, but from that day forward, I moved into a guest room at the Thompson mansion to be with her 24/7. Mrs. Thompson couldn't stop crying as she thanked me, though I could see a million questions in her eyes about my intentions. I cut her off before she could ask, promising that as long as Ava would have me, I wasn't going anywhere. In reality, it didn't matter how many times she screamed at me to leave or told me to rot in hell. I stayed put. During one particularly frustrating session, when her nerves showed no signs of life, she had a complete meltdown and started screaming for everyone to get out of her sight. She was confined to her wheelchair by then, and she had managed to turn her designer bedroom into a war zone of shattered glass and broken decor. The only thing that had changed was that she no longer aimed her projectiles at my head. She broke everything around me instead. Once her rage had spent itself, I walked over and knelt by her side, whispering the same promise I had made since the start. I told her to trust me, a phrase I repeated like a mantra every single day for 2 long years. Slowly but surely, her legs began to respond, first to deep pressure and eventually to light touch. She even started being able to wiggle her toes, which led us to the major surgery she underwent just yesterday. The surgeons were ecstatic, calling the procedure a resounding success. They told us that if her physical therapy continued at this pace, there was no reason she wouldn't be walking again in no time. The moment the news broke, Mrs. Thompson pulled me aside with tears in her eyes and pressed a black bank card into my palm. I looked down at it with a heavy heart, knowing that the 2 years of my life I had given up were never about a payout. All of Ava's socialite friends in the city already referred to me as her husband, but deep down, I knew the truth. I had never even officially asked her to be my girlfriend, let alone discussed our future as a couple. There was only one time, after a particularly devastating doctor's appointment where the results were subpar, that Ava looked me in the eye and made a promise. She told me that the moment she could walk, she would marry me without hesitation. I remember pushing her wheelchair back into the mansion that day, and she just fell apart the second the door closed. She had spent her whole life as the golden girl of the San Francisco elite, and losing that status was a blow that would have broken anyone. While I tried to comfort her with a hug, she lashed out like a wounded animal and bit down on my shoulder so hard I could feel the skin tear. I still have the scar from that day, a permanent reminder of her pain. When she saw the blood soaking through my shirt, she finally snapped out of her trance, looking absolutely mortified. She kept sobbing and apologizing over and over as I calmly sat her down and began her leg massage with the same patience I always had. It was in that quiet, bloody moment that she told me she loved me and wanted to spend her life with me. Before that day, she had once point blank asked if I was in love with her. I didn't blink or turn away. I just looked her in the eye and told her yes. She had studied my face for a long time after that, eventually whispering that she wanted to be my wife. But I didn't do any of this for a reward or a contract. I didn't want her to stay with me out of a sense of obligation or gratitude for the 2 years I spent nursing her. My only real hope was that one day she would love me as deeply and freely as I loved her. Following our routine, I stood up and warmed the massage oil in my hands before reaching out to work on her legs one last time. I could feel her eyes on me, watching every move I made in the stifling silence of the room. Finally, she broke the quiet, telling me that I didn't need to do this anymore. I felt my hands falter for just a fraction of a second. I forced myself to finish the session, completing every step with the same care I always did. When I was done, I looked up at her, clinging to a dying hope, and asked her one more time if she still wanted to be with me. She looked like a deer in headlights, her mouth opening to speak before she caught herself and looked away. I felt like a fool, silently mocking myself for thinking that her old promises actually meant something now that she was healthy again. But after 2 years of giving her everything I had and loving her in secret long before that, it was impossible not to hope for a miracle. I had spent so long being her rock that I thought I had earned a place in her future. I walked to the sink to wash the oil from my hands, trying to keep my composure. As I turned to leave the bathroom, her voice drifted in from the bedroom, telling me that I was just like a brother to her. The words hit me like a physical blow, sending a sharp throb through my temples. I leaned against the doorframe and rubbed my eyes, telling her to stop. Being relegated to the role of a brother was a far more painful rejection than any simple no. When I walked back into the main room, the sounds of her friends' laughter echoed from the hallway. I took one last look at Ava before reaching into my pocket and pulling out the velvet box I had been carrying for months. My knuckles were white from gripping the box, so hard that the edges were starting to dent. Without saying a word, I tossed it into the trash can by the door, as if it were nothing but a piece of scrap metal. I knew that ring was nowhere near the caliber of jewelry a Thompson would wear, but I had saved for months to buy it. I had carried it like a sacred object, imagining the perfect moment when I would finally ask her to be mine. For years, I had made excuses for her, telling myself that we just needed more time for her to heal. But watching that box disappear into the trash gave me a strange sense of liberation. My only regret was that I hadn't done it months ago. Ava caught the movement and her eyes widened as if she wanted to protest, but I just held up a hand to silence her. I walked behind her chair and began pushing her toward the living room where her guests were waiting. Her friends surrounded us the moment we entered the room, with one of them teasingly asking what kind of romantic secrets we were whispering to each other. They joked about how we were being too private for our own good. One of the girls laughed and said they would save the real teasing for our wedding day. Another friend suggested we all stay out late to celebrate the successful surgery, wanting to keep the party going as long as possible. Ava's circle consisted of the most well-mannered elite in the city, and they were incredibly attentive to her needs. The table was covered in fresh juices and healthy appetizers, all carefully chosen to accommodate her post-op diet. A friend asked Ava if she was ready to go skiing once she finished her rehab, suggesting a trip to Aspen in the winter. Ava gave a non-committal nod, her mind clearly elsewhere. The friend then flashed me a grin and said I had to come along as the designated caretaker for Ava. Ava looked up at me then, her expression blank, leaving it entirely up to me to respond. After being shot down twice in one night, I still had a shred of dignity left. I told them they should go ahead and enjoy themselves, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. Then Ava dropped the hammer, telling everyone that I was welcome to come because she had always seen me as a brother anyway. The room went dead silent, the collective gasp of her friends almost audible in the sudden chill. One of her friends tried to play it off as a joke, jokingly poking Ava's cheek and asking what she was thinking. Another quickly jumped in to save the mood, suggesting that Ava was probably just lightheaded from the painkillers and didn't know what she was saying. The tension dissipated into forced laughter, but Ava didn't lift a finger to correct the record. I found myself thinking back to a conversation I had years ago with my best friend Ethan about the reality of my situation. Ethan had asked me if I really knew what I was getting into by falling for a Thompson. He warned me that girls from that kind of old money lived in a completely different world than people like us. He asked me if I honestly thought a girl like her would ever look at a guy like me if she hadn't been paralyzed. I didn't have an answer for him then, and I didn't have one now, but Ava had finally given me the answer I was too afraid to admit. The party carried on around me with its expensive wine and soft jazz, as everyone reminisced about their shared history. I looked down on my phone and searched for the Aspen resort they were talking about, realizing it was the kind of place where a single night cost more than my monthly salary. The realization that I was just a temporary fix in her life finally hit home. When I stood up to leave the room, I could feel Ava's eyes tracking my every movement, though she didn't say a word to stop me. I went into the guest room and pulled out my phone to call Mrs. Thompson. She was the woman who had begged me to save her daughter and promised me the world if I could just get Ava back on her feet. I took a deep breath and asked her about the balance on the black card she had given me. She had clearly been expecting the call, because she didn't even let me finish my sentence before telling me there was a $10 million balance waiting for me. She told me to keep it as a token of her appreciation for everything I had sacrificed for her family. I gave a short, clipped acknowledgement and hung up the phone. I didn't have much to pack, as most of my belongings were just old clothes I had worn while nursing Ava. I decided to leave it all behind, tossing my things into the trash and walking out with nothing but that bank card in my wallet. As I crossed the living room, one of the guys asked where I was heading so late at night. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of Ava, so I just lied and said I was heading out to grab a quick bite to eat. They offered to Postmate something to the house, but I joked that their taste in food was way out of my price range. Ava's eyes locked onto mine, a look of sudden realization dawning on her face. I gave the room a final, casual wave and walked out the door for good. By 1 a.m., I was finally free from the Thompson mansion. I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back and a $10 million bank card, which felt like a fair trade for 2 years of my life. The weight of constantly monitoring Ava's moods and bracing for her midnight meltdowns was finally gone. I felt an incredible sense of relief wash over me, making my body feel lighter than it had in years. The sudden freedom was so jarring that I found myself unable to sleep. I sat on the balcony of my new place with a cold beer, staring up at the San Francisco skyline. It was the first time in years that the world around me felt truly peaceful. In the silence, I was finally able to process my own thoughts without Ava's needs taking center stage. I had expected to be heartbroken, but all I felt was a profound sense of nothingness. I opened another beer and traced the faint scar on my shoulder where Ava had bitten me. I wondered how long it would take for the physical and emotional marks of her to fade. The only thing that stayed with me from that night was the bite of the cold wind and the unexpected brightness of the stars. Just as the sun was starting to come up, my phone buzzed with a call from Ava. I answered it, but she didn't say anything for a long time. I finally had to ask her what she wanted. After a long, hesitant pause, she finally spoke up, her voice small as she told me she was craving the homemade breakfast I used to make for her. She sounded like she was trying to pretend nothing had changed. Back when she was first paralyzed, she would go on hunger strikes, refusing to eat even the most expensive meals her mother ordered. I was the only one who didn't coddle her. If she didn't want to eat, I would just sit there and eat my own meal in front of her. I used to sit right across from her and enjoy my food with such obvious pleasure that it drove her crazy. By the third day of her tantrums, her hunger would always get the better of her, and she would finally give in. I remember her finally breaking down and begging for a bite of my shrimp noodles. Over time, she lost her taste for restaurant food because I taught myself how to cook all her favorites exactly the way she liked them. But the memory of her cold silence from the night before was still fresh in my mind. I told her flatly that I wasn't at the mansion anymore and that I wouldn't be coming back. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When she didn't respond, I simply ended the call and went back to staring at my bank balance. The amount was so staggering that I found myself counting the zeros over and over, unable to fully grasp that my life had changed so drastically. As I tucked the card back into my wallet, Ethan's warning about our different worlds finally made sense. He had been right all along, and I had been too blinded by love to see it. My parents were just simple, working-class people who had taken a bus all the way to the city to see me when they heard about Ava's accident. Mrs. Thompson had treated them with a kind of performative kindness that felt more like pity than genuine respect. My parents were clearly out of their element in the Thompson mansion, looking uncomfortable surrounded by all that wealth. On the ride home, my father told me that if I ever felt like it was too much, I should just walk away because we simply didn't belong in their world. It took me 2 full years to finally look back and understand the true power dynamic of that meeting. The dinner the Thompsons served was so absurdly lavish that even Ava complained about the unnecessary extravagance. For my parents, 2 simple people from a small town in rural Ohio, that level of excess did not feel like a warm welcome. It felt like a deliberate attempt to intimidate them. Mrs. Thompson's hospitality was never just about saying thank you. It was a cold and calculated reminder that our families belonged to different social classes. I took that bank card and bought a luxury condo in the city, paying in full without even denting the balance. I spent the following weeks focused on interior design and paperwork, letting the time slip away until 15 days had passed. I ran into Ava again at a bistro near my new place. Her circle of friends was crowded around her, and I could hear them insisting that she would regret letting me walk out of her life forever. One of them suggested that she should just turn on the charm and offer a small apology to bring me back to my senses. Another friend joked that he still thought of me as her future husband. Ava looked incredibly pale after being confined indoors for 2 years, her skin appearing almost translucent under the afternoon sun. Her face seemed to glow with an unnatural, sickly brightness in the harsh light. She gave a dismissive shrug at their comments and remarked that she might consider it if I suddenly materialized in front of her. She had no idea that I was sitting at the very next table, hearing every single word of their conversation. I kept my back turned, listening to the casual way she discussed our history. I tried to shift in my seat to stay out of their line of sight. Just then, my friend Ethan burst through the front door and called out my name with his usual loud energy. He hurried over to my table with a wide grin, excitedly telling me that they had my favorite almond croissants in stock today. The moment Ethan spoke, Ava's table went dead silent. I could feel the weight of their collective stares following him until they landed directly on me. Ethan set the coffee down and noticed my stiff expression, asking me what was going on. He caught the tension in the air and immediately straightened up, looking around the room. I forced myself to relax, realizing I couldn't let Ava and her socialite friends control my mood anymore. I gave him a reassuring smile and told him to just have a seat and enjoy his breakfast. I changed the subject by asking about the pastries, and we fell into an easy rhythm of conversation. However, the cafe was small enough that I could still hear the hushed whispers from Ava's table floating over to us. They were clearly talking about my sudden appearance. I heard one of her friends whisper that this was a sign from fate and that she should go over to talk to me. They were pressuring her to settle things, even threatening to stop hanging out with her if she didn't fix the situation. The peer pressure at their table was becoming palpable. I recognized all of their voices from the long months Ava spent in the hospital. Most of them had visited her back then, including one guy who had been nursing a crush on her for years. I remembered how awkward those visits used to be when she was at her worst. That guy had once brought her flowers, but Ava had snatched them and hurled the bouquet directly at his face in front of the entire ward. He had stood there paralyzed with humiliation while I quietly picked up the petals and put the arrangement back together. I'd even given him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder before he fled the room. Ava had stared at him with cold, hateful eyes, asking him if he still found her attractive now that she was a mess. The poor guy couldn't even find his voice, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. I had backed out of the room then, giving them some privacy by softly closing the door. When he finally emerged, he tried to laugh it off by saying he was over her and that she wasn't worth the trouble. He started to walk away with his ruined flowers, but stopped halfway down the hall. He turned around and walked back toward me with a strange look on his face. He watched me kneeling on the floor, carefully picking up the last of the fallen leaves and petals she had thrown. He looked at me for a long moment before telling me that I was a good man and thanking me for the help. Then he warned me that I should stop wasting my heart on Ava, because she would never truly deserve someone like me. That guy turned out to be Ethan, and we eventually became close friends, often grabbing beers and wings on the weekends. I knew better than anyone that Ava was always surrounded by decent people who genuinely cared for her. I was snapped out of my memories by the sound of Ethan's voice complaining about something trivial. Suddenly, I heard Ava call my name from the next table. I looked up and saw her biting her lip, looking like she was trying to find the right words to say. She seemed to be struggling to get anything out, her pride clearly warring with her guilt. I could hear her friends whispering for her to just apologize and use her charm to win me over. They were convinced that a little bit of flirting would be enough to make me forgive everything. Ava's expression only grew more rigid as she listened to them. I didn't want or need an apology from her, because love can't be forced or bought. Besides, I had already accepted the Thompson family's money. With $10 million in my account, I felt it was hypocritical to play the part of the wounded lover while enjoying the payout. Ava just stood there like a statue, looking increasingly uncomfortable. I decided to end her misery and told her that I didn't need an apology. She visibly relaxed, letting out a tiny sigh of relief that she thought I couldn't hear. As she turned to leave, she paused and asked when I was planning to come back to the house. I realized I hadn't been firm enough before, so I looked her in the eye and told her that I was never coming back. There was no room for negotiation in my voice. Ava blinked in surprise and looked down at her shoes, offering a quiet response before retreating to her friends. They immediately crowded around her, eager to hear if I had forgiven her and when things would go back to normal. They started asking about wedding dates and when they could expect an invitation to the ceremony. Ava shut them down with a cold, distant tone, stating firmly that there was not going to be a wedding. The entire table went silent once again. She raised her voice so the whole cafe could hear, asking why everyone assumed she was obligated to marry me. She argued that owing someone a debt shouldn't mean she had to sacrifice her entire life to them. She repeated for the third time that she only ever saw me as a brother. That was the third time she had said it, and the more she said it, the less it hurt. I stood up and addressed her entire group, telling them they were all mistaken about our relationship. I informed them that I was simply a paid employee hired to see to her recovery. Ava snapped her head toward me, her eyes burning with a sudden rage. I didn't look away. I met her gaze with complete indifference. Even as she glared at me, I calmly told her that she didn't even need to consider me a brother, and that we should just be strangers from now on. Ava started dating someone new, and she made sure the whole world knew about it. Her Instagram and Twitter were flooded with photos of them together, and he was glued to her side at every high society event in the city. It was impossible to escape the news of her new romance. We eventually crossed paths at a mutual friends gala. Since we moved in the same elite circles, a run-in was inevitable, though no one expected it so soon. When she walked in on her new boyfriend's arm, Ethan gave me a sympathetic pat on the back as a silent show of support. Everyone there knew the history of how I had nursed her back to health, so the pity was expected. I just gave Ethan a quick smile to show I was fine before turning my attention to her new guy. Honestly, he looked perfectly average, with nothing about him that stood out as particularly impressive. Ava noticed me, but acted like I didn't exist, leading her boyfriend to a secluded corner table. When their appetizers arrived, she didn't even pick up a fork. She just gave a small nod toward the plate, signaling her boyfriend to serve her. The guy was falling all over himself to please her, peeling her fruit and feeding it to her piece by piece. Ava didn't even look at him, staring blankly across the room as she mechanically chewed on a grape. She looked completely checked out, as if she were just going through the motions of a relationship. It was obvious to everyone in the room that she was just performing for the cameras. If this was the great love she had traded me for, it seemed incredibly shallow and hollow. I wasn't bothered by it, but Ethan was practically fuming on my behalf. Ethan grabbed my shoulder and insisted on introducing me to some new girls to help me move on with my life. I had to drag him toward the exit, trying to get him home before he made a scene. Right as we reached the door, we came face to face with Ava's new boyfriend. He stared at me for a long moment before telling me that he knew exactly who I was. I stopped and gave him a faint, unbothered smile as I waited for him to finish. He went on about how much Ava owed me and how hard I must have worked to help her recover. I gave a polite nod and tried to move past him with Ethan, but he stepped into my path with a smug look on his face. He told me that I shouldn't think I was special just because I helped her, arguing that it was simply my duty to look after her. He claimed that he would have done exactly the same thing if he had been her boyfriend at the time. He spoke with a sense of unearned moral superiority, having no idea what it actually felt like to spend 2 years cleaning up shattered glass and enduring her emotional abuse. He couldn't possibly understand the exhaustion of being someone's only source of hope for 700 days. I didn't bother arguing with him. I just gave him a knowing smile and kept walking. I privately wondered if he would be so quick to brag if Ava ever had a relapse and needed that level of care again. It was easy to be the hero when the hard work was already done. Ava looked absolutely miserable listening to him, so one of her friends tried to intervene before things got even more awkward. I joined in on the joke, suggesting that if she ever got sick again, they should probably just hire a professional and save everyone the trouble. That comment seemed to push Ava over the edge, and she slammed her glass onto the table with a loud crack. She glared at us and snapped that she was tired of everyone talking about the past, calling the whole conversation incredibly boring. If she had truly moved on, she wouldn't have been so triggered by a simple mention of our history. Her reaction felt less like closure and more like she was running from a guilty conscience. When Ethan finally sobered up the next day and heard what the guy said, he was ready to go back to the club and start a fight. I let him vent his frustrations while I casually checked my banking app, slowly counting the zeros in my balance one more time. I realized then that $10 million makes it very easy to stay calm in the face of an insult. Money might not buy happiness, but it certainly buys a lot of peace of mind. Ethan didn't believe for a second that I was over her, thinking I was just putting on a brave face to hide my pain. He started pestering me to let him set me up on a blind date, arguing that if Ava could move on so quickly, I should too. He told me that with my new wealth and my looks, I could have any girl in the city if I wanted. Things move fast in San Francisco, and people often end up in bed before they even know each other's last names. But I had zero interest in using my money to buy someone's affection or chasing shallow flings. I didn't mind a casual date now and then, but I was looking for something real, something built on trust rather than a bank statement. When I turned down Ethan's offer, he just took it as proof that I was still hopelessly in love with Ava. He went on another rant about how terrible Ava was, and I just nodded along and threw in a few insults to make him feel better. As the weeks turned into months, I found a new hobby in deep-sea fishing and joined several local angling clubs. I ended up buying a sleek yacht and spent most of my time out on the Pacific. Being away from the city with only the sound of the wind and the waves helped me find a level of peace I hadn't felt in years. I met a few women during my trips, but most of them lost interest the moment they realized I wasn't interested in buying them designer bags or taking them to the most expensive restaurants in town. Their patience for a man who preferred a quiet night on a boat was incredibly short-lived. It wasn't long before I'd see them on Facebook posing with some new guy who was willing to spend the money I wouldn't. My friends started joking that I was like a starter boyfriend, a safe transitional phase that girls went through before they found their real match. I just laughed it off because I was in no rush to jump back into another serious relationship. I had spent 2 years entirely focused on Ava, and now I just wanted to focus on myself for a while. I wanted to make sure I was completely healed before I committed to someone else. When I was finally ready, I knew exactly what I wanted. Someone who was honest, grounded, and had no interest in the games Ava and her friends played. I still held onto the belief that sincerity would eventually be met with sincerity. Word got back to me that Ava had already dumped the guy from the gala and had replaced him with someone new within a single week. She posted a new set of couple photos on her Facebook, and by that point, even our mutual friends finally stopped trying to get us back together. The reality that Ava and I were over for good had finally sunk in for everyone. I had been living in San Francisco for 6 months, but I still heard occasional updates about her drama. Apparently, she had already burned through another relationship and was single once again. It seemed she had finally learned her lesson because she didn't immediately jump into a new romance this time. Her friends, however, wouldn't stop teasing her about being single, and they started bugging me again to give her another chance. With Christmas approaching, I flew back home to visit my family. I was shocked to find the entire group of Ava's friends waiting for me at the arrivals gate, laughing and making a scene as they surrounded me. They joked about how dark my tan was, asking if I had been fishing or working in a mine. Despite everything that happened with Ava, they had remained surprisingly loyal to me and hadn't let our breakup ruin our friendships. One of the girls had even texted me months ago, saying she wanted to stay friends regardless of what happened between me and Ava. But the real shock was seeing Ava herself standing at the back of the group, looking a bit hesitant. She hung back while the others were joking around, her expression unreadable. Eventually, she seemed to pull herself together and slowly walked over to where I was standing. She gave me a quiet, long time no see as she reached the group. The last time I had seen her, she had looked at me with nothing but contempt, but now she was acting like we were just old friends catching up. I gave her a polite nod and echoed her greeting. She hesitated for a moment and started to say something about her legs, but my phone started buzzing in my pocket before she could finish. I apologized and took the call, hearing Hannah's cheerful voice on the other end, asking where I was. Just hearing her voice was enough to bring a smile to my face, and her energy was a sharp contrast to the heavy atmosphere around Ava. I chuckled and told her I'd send her my location, telling her to take her time and not to rush through traffic. By the time I put my phone away, the group had already decided on a restaurant for our welcome back dinner. Once the plans were made, I asked if I could bring a guest along with me. The whole group immediately perked up, clamoring to know who this mystery person was and if I was finally dating someone new. Just then, a girl in a bright pink puffer jacket came running through the terminal toward us. She looked like a burst of sunshine in the drab airport, and despite my warnings to slow down, she ran right into my arms. She grabbed my hand and leaned against my shoulder, telling me how much she had missed me while I was away. It happened so fast that the rest of the group was left standing there in stunned silence, trying to process what they were seeing. I tried to take her bag from her, but she insisted on carrying it herself while she clung to my arm. I just laughed and introduced her to the group as my girlfriend Hannah. Life has a funny way of working out. Sometimes the person you've been chasing forever isn't the one for you, and you find the perfect match in the last place you'd ever look. I had finally found someone who made all the years of chasing Ava feel like a distant memory. Hannah was a genuine fishing enthusiast, and we had met through one of my local angling groups. What started as a few tips about bait and lures quickly turned into hours of deep conversation and an easy, natural connection. I had braced myself for her to run away once she realized I wasn't the type to spend my weekends at fancy galas or designer stores. To my surprise, she didn't care about any of that. She was perfectly happy just being with me. She was independent and successful in her own right, and we shared the same values about what really mattered in life. Before I even knew it, she had become the most important part of my daily routine. My friends went wild the second they met her, accusing me of keeping her a secret from them. They teased me for months for not telling them I was seeing someone, and they immediately insisted that I was paying for the entire dinner that night to make up for it. I agreed to pay with a laugh, though I hadn't really intended to hide her from them. I just hadn't expected her to actually fly out to join me for the holidays, so I hadn't had a chance to mention it. I had missed my original flight because of a massive backup on the Bay Bridge, and while I was waiting for my new flight, she had sent me a pouting iMessage about how long I was taking. It was in that moment that I realized how much she had been looking forward to seeing me. We were supposed to fly in together on the same flight, but my delay had messed everything up. She had arrived hours before me and had spent the entire afternoon waiting at the airport, just so she could be the first person to see me when I landed. My friends wouldn't stop teasing us, so I finally threw my hands up and agreed to foot the bill for everyone. Hannah playfully mimicked my gesture and cheered along with them, clearly enjoying the lively energy of my old friends. Hannah's easygoing nature made her an instant hit with the group, and she had everyone laughing within minutes of meeting them. When we arrived at the restaurant, we found that the reservation was perfect, with just enough room for everyone to sit together at one big table. Someone suddenly realized that Ava was missing from the group and gave her a quick call to see where she was. She answered with a weak, strained voice, telling them that her legs were bothering her and that she had to make an emergency trip to the clinic. The whole table was immediately on edge when they heard she was in pain, asking for updates on what the doctor had said. She tried to brush it off, telling them it was just some minor inflammation and that they should go ahead and eat without her. Knowing her medical history, none of our friends felt comfortable staying for a celebration while she was potentially facing a setback. Seeing their hesitation, I told them they should go and check on her, assuring them that we could always reschedule our dinner for another night. I suggested to Hannah that we should just head home and get some rest after the long day of travel. She was completely unfazed by the sudden change in plans and gave everyone a friendly wave as we prepared to leave the group. Hannah was in a great mood on the ride home, pointing out everything from the holiday decorations to the stray dogs on the street corner. She had a way of finding beauty in the most ordinary things, which was one of the reasons I loved being around her. When we pulled up to my building, we were both shocked to see Ava waiting for us by the front entrance. I felt Hannah's grip on my arm tighten for a second before she stepped forward to confront her. Hannah addressed her with a polite, overly sweet tone, calling her big sister as if they were old acquaintances. I watched them both, curious to see how Ava would react. Ava gave her a thin, forced smile before turning her full attention back to me, ignoring Hannah entirely. Ava looked me in the eye and repeated her greeting from earlier, her voice heavy with unspoken words. Hannah didn't seem bothered by the blatant snub. She just stood there quietly, keeping a firm grip on my hand. I could tell Ava was preparing to launch into a long explanation, but I cut her off before she could start. I introduced Hannah as my girlfriend, making it clear where my loyalties now lay. Ava's face flickered with a brief, unreadable emotion before she gave a tiny, almost silent nod of acknowledgement. She quickly shifted the conversation back to herself, claiming that she was experiencing some frightening symptoms in her legs again. Hannah jumped in with a look of genuine concern, telling Ava that she should head to the emergency room right away if she was in pain. She even offered to call an ambulance for her, sounding perfectly sincere in her desire to help. As she pulled out her phone, she added that since I wasn't a medical professional, there wasn't much I could do to help her with a physical injury. Ava continued to ignore her, looking at me with a desperate expression and calling my name once more. Hannah wouldn't let the silence go, turning to me and asking why Ava was being so rude by not answering her questions. I didn't have an answer for her, but Ava interrupted again, her voice rising as she tried to get my undivided attention. Hannah persisted, leaning into my personal space and asking me again why Ava was acting so strangely. I gave a weary sigh and gently pushed her forehead away, telling her that I didn't have a clue what was going on in Ava's head. She gave me a playful pout and refused to back down, so I gave up and reached for my keys to let us inside. It was only as I was turning the lock that I realized Ava was still standing right there, watching our every move with a look of pure misery. Hannah pointed out the obvious, reminding me that we shouldn't just leave Ava standing out in the cold. Ava looked stunned for a second before finally asking if I would be willing to have a private conversation with her about her situation. Hannah gripped my hand tighter and asked me what possible reason I could have for wanting to talk to my ex. I realized then that she was putting on a bit of a jealous act just to get under Ava's skin, playing the part of the possessive girlfriend to perfection. I decided to play along with her little game and told Ava that we had nothing left to discuss before firmly closing the door on her. As soon as we were inside, Hannah leaned against me and admitted that she was feeling incredibly jealous of the way Ava looked at me. I ruffled her hair and asked her why she was worried, reminding her that I had been completely honest about my past with Ava from the very beginning. I had never kept secrets from her, so I didn't see why she would feel threatened by someone I had already moved on from. She complained that I was too oblivious for my own good, but before I could even try to defend myself, her mood shifted again. She smiled and said that being a bit of a blockhead actually made me more charming in a weird way. She whispered that my obliviousness meant I was immune to other women's flirting, which made her feel more secure. Later that night, Ava called me and immediately tried to drop a bombshell about Hannah having a serious 4-year relationship with her first love. Ava was back in the hospital, though I didn't know the full details of her condition. It seemed that all of the men who had promised to love her forever were suddenly showing up at her bedside again, hoping to win her back now that she was vulnerable. Our friends were actually placing bets on how long her new suitors would last before they got bored and left. Most of them didn't even make it through the first 48 hours, which Ethan found hilarious, telling me it was exactly what she deserved for treating me the way she did. I had no intention of letting her back into my life. The moment I took that $10 million, our story was officially over. But then I received a desperate message from Mrs. Thompson, begging me to come and see Ava in private one last time. Hannah was right there next to me when the message arrived, so I immediately replied that my girlfriend wouldn't be comfortable with me visiting my ex. Mrs. Thompson called me seconds later, her voice trembling with desperation as she pleaded for my help. She offered me even more money, crying that Ava had stopped eating and was wasting away in her hospital bed. She kept asking why this was happening to her daughter, her voice breaking as she sobbed into the phone. I could tell from her frantic words that Ava's condition was actually quite serious this time. Her mother was in a total state of collapse, begging me to come and convince Ava to start eating again before she did permanent damage to herself. Hannah was incredibly understanding about the whole thing, telling me that I should go see her if I thought it would help. But I knew that there was nothing left for us to say to each other, and going back would only make things worse. I knew that if I gave in once, they would just keep coming back to me for help every time she had a crisis. I had to draw a line in the sand, so I told her that I didn't know their family anything more and that we both needed to move on with our separate lives. I heard through the grapevine the next day that Ava's condition had taken a turn for the worse. The doctors were baffled by the sudden muscle atrophy, and it was looking more and more likely that she would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. She had barely survived the first time I was by her side, and I couldn't imagine how she was handling the news that her hard-won freedom was being taken away again. The thought of her going through that nightmare a second time was almost too much for me to process. I didn't respond to any more of their messages, but Ava eventually managed to call me herself. I expected her to beg for my help, but instead, she just gave a bitter laugh and asked if I really thought my new relationship with Hannah was going to last. I stayed silent as she proposed a bet on Hannah's loyalty to me. I knew that the moment you feel the need to test someone's trust, the relationship is already as good as over. Testing a partner is a game where nobody ever really wins. I told her I wasn't interested in her immature games and tried to hang up. She didn't seem to care, just warned me to wait and see, claiming that beautiful women like Hannah were never truly loyal to just one man. I figured she was just lashed out because she was miserable, so I put her words out of my mind. The Christmas season was a blur of family dinners and parties, and I was so busy with my own relatives that I didn't have much time to spend with Hannah. She was a little annoyed at first, but she eventually understood how busy I was and started exploring San Francisco on her own. She was so outgoing that she made new friends wherever she went, so I wasn't worried about her being lonely. Within 2 days, her social calendar was already completely full. She spent every day out and about, often leaving the house before I even woke up. I'd occasionally catch her for a quick kiss before she left, but most mornings I just found a handwritten note on the kitchen counter telling me where she was headed. As the notes started to pile up, I felt a strange sense of unease starting to grow in the back of my mind. I started wondering who she was spending all her time with and why she was being so vague about her plans. I remembered how she used to grill me about my schedule whenever I went away on fishing trips. I finally understood the anxiety she must have felt back then. I was planning to sit her down and have a serious talk about our communication, but Ava beat me to it. She sent me an iMessage from an unknown number that contained a single, devastating photo. The photo showed Hannah in a cafe, laughing and smiling at a guy I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I realized she had lied to me about her plans for the day, simply telling me she was meeting up with an old friend from high school. Ava followed up with another message, taunting me with more photos of them together and asking if I thought Hannah would even bother coming home that night. I didn't reply. I just blocked the number and tried to keep my head from spinning. I sat at home for hours, wrestling with my doubts before finally sending her a quick text to ask what she was up to. She replied almost instantly, saying she was just finishing up dinner with a friend. I tried to keep my tone casual as I asked when she was planning on being home. She told me she'd be back by 10, so I sat on the couch and watched the clock as the minutes ticked by. I felt a growing sense of dread in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm and wait for her to walk through the door. 10 o'clock came and went, then 11, and there was still no sign of her. Ava called me from yet another burner number, laughing as she told me that she had been right about beautiful women all along. She sounded almost triumphant as she mocked my situation. I couldn't understand why she was so obsessed with ruining my life. I realized that even if Hannah was cheating on me, it wasn't the end of the world. I would just break up with her and move on. I wasn't the type to let a betrayal destroy my future. I've never been someone who let past heartbreaks stop me from finding love again. I thought about what Ethan had told me about Ava not being good enough for me, and I realized how blind I had been to her flaws. I had been so focused on her potential that I ignored who she actually was. Looking back on those 2 years, I saw her through a much clearer lens. She had a terrible temper and was always ready to give up at the first sign of trouble, despite having every advantage in the world. She had tried to drag me down with her into her misery, and I finally saw that she never deserved the sacrifices I made. By 1 a.m., Hannah still wasn't home, and I started to feel like a complete fool for waiting. I realized that I was letting Ava control my emotions and my actions, and I was done being her puppet. I decided to take matters into my own hands and confront Hannah directly instead of listening to Ava's lies. I grabbed my coat and headed downstairs, arriving just in time to see Hannah stepping out of a luxury sedan. I recognized the man in the driver's seat from the photos Ava had sent me. Hannah looked absolutely terrified when she saw me standing there, immediately trying to make excuses for why she was getting home so late. The guy behind the wheel gave me a casual wave as if we were old friends. I walked up to the car and knocked on his window before he could pull away, and he reluctantly rolled it down to ask what I wanted. I looked him straight in the eye and asked if he was Hannah's first love. He looked incredibly uncomfortable and tried to explain that I had the wrong idea, but I cut him off and demanded a simple yes or no answer. Hannah could see that I was furious, and she started babbling about how bad the traffic was in the city. I reminded her that she had promised to be home by 10 and that there was no way a traffic jam could last for 3 hours in the middle of the night. I asked him one more time to tell me the truth, and he finally admitted that he was her first love. I couldn't believe that in all the time we had been together, Hannah had never once mentioned a serious 4-year relationship with this guy. Some people might have let it go, but I couldn't handle the lying. I broke up with her right there on the sidewalk, and her ex jumped out of the car to try and explain that nothing had happened between them. He claimed he was just in town for work and that they had only met up for a casual catch-up. He insisted that their meeting was purely accidental and that they had only gone out for a quick dinner. He even offered to let me check the security footage from the restaurant to prove that nothing inappropriate had happened. The more he talked, the more I realized that the actual details of their dinner didn't matter as much as the fact that she had lied to me. Hannah finally told him to shut up, her voice sharp with frustration as she realized her mistakes had caught up with her. The guy finally got the hint and backed off, looking genuinely guilty for the mess he had caused. Hannah followed me all the way to my front door, physically blocking me from entering as she begged for a chance to explain herself. I looked her in the eye and told her that we had nothing left to say to each other. I reminded her that I had been completely transparent about my past with Ava from day one, and all I had ever asked for in return was the same level of honesty. She had chosen to hide her relationship with this man and had lied to me about her plans for the entire day. I realized that I had seen the warning signs for weeks, but had chosen to ignore them because I wanted to believe in her. I had made a conscious effort to stay loyal to her, never entertaining other women or engaging in any kind of inappropriate behavior. I had dedicated my entire heart to our relationship, only for her to repay that devotion with secrets and lies. I took a deep breath and told her that we were finished, my voice steady and cold. Our relationship had started with so much promise, but it had ended just as quickly as it had begun. A few days later, my friends invited me out and asked me to bring Hannah along. I told them quite frankly that we were no longer together. They were shocked at first, but they quickly shifted gears and started trying to set me up with someone else, which I politely declined. I was finished with games and lies, and I was perfectly happy being single until I found someone who was actually honest. Mrs. Thompson, however, wouldn't stop calling me, begging me to come to the hospital and visit Ava one last time. I stood my ground and refused to visit, but I did send them a comprehensive guide to Ava's recovery based on my experience. I outlined everything from her physical therapy routine to her diet, hoping it would help her get back on her feet without me. I booked a flight back home to see my parents and made sure to get to the airport early this time. As I was settling into my seat, I was shocked to find Hannah sitting right next to me. She gave me a wide, cheerful smile and told me that she was glad we hadn't missed our flight together this time. She was clearly still in denial about our breakup and was trying everything she could to win me back. She leaned against me and started apologizing, promising that she would never lie to me again if I just gave her one more chance. She kept begging for my forgiveness, asking why we couldn't just go back to the way things were before everything fell apart. She kept making excuses for her behavior, but she never addressed the core issue of the broken trust between us. I had already proven that I could walk away from Ava and her family, so I didn't see why I should put up with Hannah's secrets either. I simply told her no and that our relationship was over for good. When we finally landed, she stood there watching me leave with a devastated expression on her face. I started walking toward the taxi stand, but I couldn't help but look back at her one last time. By the time I turned around, she had already disappeared into the crowd. She had been a wonderful person in many ways, but her maturity hadn't quite caught up with her heart. I realized that even though it didn't work out, I was still grateful for the time we spent together. I knew that when the right person eventually came along, I would be ready to give them my whole heart without any reservations. I still believed in love, and I wasn't going to let one bad experience change who I was. There are some people you simply cannot keep, no matter how much of yourself you sacrifice for them. You can give them every ounce of your devotion and still never receive a single moment of true honesty in return. Sincerity should never be a bargaining chip used to win someone over. It should be the standard you use to decide who stays in your life. Anyone who leaves you guessing or keeps you waiting for their affection was never worth your time to begin with. Only the person who finally shows you what it actually feels like to be loved deserves a place in the rest of your life.